It was one of those moments that felt like a punch to the gut, a moment that would change everything. I had always been close to my dad, at least that's what I thought. Growing up, I was the one who stuck by him, through the bad times, the tough moments, and the endless family drama. But when I found out he had passed away, everything I thought I knew about our relationship was shattered in an instant. I remember sitting there holding the envelope in my hands, staring at the official letter from his lawyer. The words felt like a blur at first, but then they began to sink in. As per his final wishes, you are not included in his estate. My heart dropped. I reread it again and again, hoping that the words would change, but they never did. My father, the man I had supported, the man I had sacrificed so much for, had left me out. He had chosen to give everything, his house, his savings, his legacy, to my half-sibling, someone who hadn't even been there for him when it counted. How could he do this? How could he betray me like that? All these years I had been there, faithfully supporting him, watching him struggle, watching him push me aside in favor of others. But this was the final straw. My blood boiled with anger and confusion. I was hurt, yes, but mostly I was furious. How could he do this to me? How could he forget everything I had done for him? But then I started to think about it, really think about it. This was it. The moment when I was finally going to take control. When I was going to prove just how much power I had. Dad thought he could leave me nothing and give everything to them. He was wrong. What he didn't know was that I had already made my plans. His house, the one he was so proud of, the one he had worked his whole life to own, was about to be mine. Not because he wanted me to have it, but because I would take it. And when I did, it wouldn't just be a victory over him. It would be a statement. A statement to show who was truly in control. My relationship with my dad was complicated, but we always managed to keep it together, or so I thought. He wasn't the most emotionally available person. I guess that's just how he was raised, and he had his own way of showing love, usually through acts of service or giving things, but not really through words. I remember when I was a kid, he would always be the one fixing things around the house, teaching me how to change a tire or showing me how to handle a wrench. Those were the moments I cherished, even though he never really said, "I love you." My mom and dad had separated when I was just a little kid, and I never really understood why. There was always tension, always something unsaid hanging in the air. But despite the separation, I always felt like I was his priority. Or at least that's what I convinced myself of for years. Then came my half-sibling, someone I barely knew but had heard enough about to know they weren't exactly a saint. We'd always been distant, and my dad's attention was mostly on me. I guess that's why it stung so much when my dad decided to bring them into his life a bit more as they got older. It was like I had been the golden child. But the moment they came into the picture, I became second best. I was used to it, though, or at least I thought I was. I started to notice the shift in my dad's actions. He'd started giving them more attention, making plans, including them in family discussions, and even letting them make decisions that had always been mine. At first, I chalked it up to me just being overly sensitive. But it wasn't just the little things, it was the big things. Like when my dad sold his business to fund their future, but never asked me if I was okay with it, even though I had worked there for years. Or when he decided to remodel the house, a place that I had practically grown up in, without consulting me about anything. He just assumed I'd be okay with it, as if my opinion didn't matter. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe I was just overreacting. But it became harder and harder to ignore the feeling that I was being pushed aside. Even at family gatherings, when my dad used to sit with me for hours, talking about life, it all shifted to them. They became the center of his world, and as much as I hated it, I couldn't bring myself to confront him. Maybe I was scared of losing him completely. Then came the final blow, the day he passed away. It was sudden, no warning, no goodbye. He was just gone, and I was left to deal with the fallout. The first call I received was from the lawyer, not to inform me of his passing, but to tell me that my dad had made his will. I had expected to inherit something, anything, something that would symbolize the years I'd spent caring for him. But I was wrong. Instead, the lawyer informed me that I was out of the will. My dad had left everything, including the house, to my half-sibling. I remember the shock washing over me, and it was like I couldn't breathe for a moment. The house, the one thing that had always been constant, that I had dreamed about inheriting one day, was now out of my reach. And it wasn't even like they needed it. They had money, connections, everything that I didn't. I was devastated, but beneath the pain, something darker started to stir. Betrayal. It was like a fire that had been smoldering in me for years. And this moment was the spark that set it ablaze. I had been overlooked, dismissed, treated as if I was insignificant in my father's life. And now, even in death, I wasn't enough to be remembered. I had reached my breaking point. I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to let my dad's final act of betrayal define me. It was time to take matters into my own hands. After the shock of learning about my father's will, I did what anyone would do. I tried to figure out what the hell happened. I couldn't accept that he had made this decision without some sort of reason behind it. Maybe it was the anger talking, but I couldn't just walk away and let it slide. So I began to dig into every detail, every conversation, every interaction I could remember. The first thing I did was contact the lawyer. He seemed sympathetic, even apologetic, but when I asked for more details, he remained vague. Your father made his decisions very clearly. It was his final wish, he said, brushing me off. But I didn't buy it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized there was something off. It just didn't make sense that my dad, someone who had relied on me for so long, would suddenly cut me out like that. I started asking around, subtly at first. I didn't want anyone to suspect what I was planning. I reached out to family friends, even some of Dad's old colleagues, trying to piece together any hints of why he'd made this decision. One night, I sat down with one of his old business partners who had always been close to him, and I asked him about the will. He was hesitant at first, but after a couple of drinks, he started to open up. That's when I first learned about the changes my father had been making in the months leading up to his death. It wasn't just the will. No, it was bigger than that. My dad had been working with someone to put together a new set of financial plans, and a lot of those plans had involved my half-sibling. Apparently, my dad had been more involved with them than I realized, and that's when the pieces started falling into place. It was like a light bulb went off. All this time, I had thought he was pulling away from me emotionally, but the truth was, he was setting things up for my half-sibling to inherit everything. It wasn't just about the house. It was about control. My dad had been grooming them to take over his life's work, his business, his home, everything that I thought I had a claim to. But here's the thing. I wasn't going to just stand by and let it happen. No, I was going to play the game, and I was going to play it better than anyone else. If my dad had wanted to pass on everything to my half-sibling, then I was going to make sure they realized just how wrong they were to leave me out of it. I wasn't going to let them walk away with everything without a fight. I had already made up my mind. I was going to buy that house, the house that my dad had poured his heart into, and show them who was truly in control. I started to look into the financial side of things. I had no idea how much my dad's house was worth, but I knew it had to be a lot. I also knew that my half-sibling had no interest in managing the house. They had no experience, no connection to the place, and no respect for what my dad had built. That was my advantage. I knew the house better than anyone. I had grown up in it. I knew every corner, every nook, every story that those walls held. So, I reached out to a realtor, and I started looking at my options. What I didn't expect was how quickly everything fell into place. The house was, indeed, worth a lot more than I had thought, but it was in need of repairs and renovations. That didn't scare me, though. It actually gave me an edge. My half-sibling wasn't going to know what hit them. They'd never have the patience to deal with the house the way I would. I was going to take it back. And then came the big revelation, something I had never expected. During one of my many late-night research sessions, I found out that the house wasn't just being handed over to my half-sibling. No, it had been sold in the process of my dad's death, under some murky financial agreement. This was my chance. I could buy it back, but I would have to act fast. I knew what I had to do now. I wasn't just going to get the house for the sake of ownership. I wasn't going to stop until my half-sibling realized they had underestimated me. They had no idea what they were up against, and I was about to make sure they knew exactly who was in control. The day came sooner than I expected. I had been working behind the scenes, gathering the funds I needed to buy back my dad's house. I had been silent, patient, and methodical, letting everything build up until it reached its breaking point. I had already made sure the house was up for sale again, knowing that my half-sibling would have no interest in taking on the burden of repairs. They'd be happy to sell it off as soon as possible, and that's when I would swoop in. When I found out the house was listed for sale, I wasted no time. I called the realtor immediately, made an offer, and within a few days, the deal was finalized. I was the new owner of my father's house. The feeling of triumph was overwhelming, but I didn't let myself get carried away. I still had one more step to take, one more crucial moment to ensure my victory. I had to confront my half-sibling. They had no idea what was coming. I had watched them over the past few weeks, how they had been flaunting their new wealth, their sense of entitlement, acting like they had won. They had no clue that I was about to take everything back, but now I was ready. It was time to show them who was in control. I called them up, casually, like nothing had changed. I told them I wanted to meet at the house to discuss some family matters. They didn't hesitate, eager to talk about what they thought was their new inheritance. They arrived at the house, and I made sure everything was in place. The house had been cleaned up, but I hadn't made any of the major repairs yet. I wanted them to see the raw, unpolished reality of what they had tried to claim as their own. When they stepped through the front door, I could see the look in their eyes, a mix of surprise and confusion. They clearly hadn't expected this. The air between us was thick with tension as I led them into the living room. I didn't waste any time. "I know what you've been up to," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You thought you could just take everything from me, huh? The house, the business, everything my dad worked for?" They stammered, trying to deny it, but I wasn't having it. "You thought you could just inherit it all and leave me with nothing. Well, you're wrong. This house? It's mine now. I bought it. Everything you thought you had is gone." Their face turned pale as the words sank in. It was clear they hadn't realized what had happened yet. They started to argue, trying to plead with me, but I stood my ground. "I'm not here to negotiate," I said, cutting them off. "You didn't just take my father's estate from me. You took my life's work. You took everything I had given up. But now I'm taking it all back. This house is mine, and there's nothing you can do about it." I watched as their demeanor shifted from confusion to panic. The realization hit them like a ton of bricks. The look in their eyes was priceless. Shock, disbelief, and a tinge of fear. They had thought they were in control, but it was clear now that they had underestimated me. They tried to make one last desperate plea, suggesting that I sell it back to them or even offer them a share. But it was too late. The power had shifted, and I was no longer the one who had to beg. They were the ones who had been played. With a final, satisfying smile, I turned and walked out of the house, leaving them there, speechless. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about showing them, showing everyone, that I was in control now. They had thought they could win, but they had no idea who they were messing with. The days that followed were a whirlwind. I settled into the house quickly, but it wasn't just about the physical space. It was about reclaiming what had been taken from me. As the dust settled, I started to realize how much power I had gained in such a short amount of time. My half-sibling had no idea how to deal with the fallout of their failed inheritance. They had thought they were entitled to everything just because they had been named in the will, but they hadn't accounted for me. It didn't take long for word to spread. Family members and mutual friends began to call, asking what had happened. Most of them were shocked, some even angry. But I didn't care. I wasn't going to apologize for taking what was rightfully mine. My half-sibling, on the other hand, was losing everything. They tried reaching out to me, asking if there was any way we could work something out, but by then, I had no interest in negotiating. They had made their choice, and now they had to face the consequences. I watched from the sidelines as they tried and failed to convince anyone to support their side. They even went as far as trying to get the courts involved, claiming that I had taken advantage of their position. But it was laughable. The house was legally mine, and there was no way they could contest that. They tried to gather evidence of their own, claiming that they should have had a bigger share of the inheritance. But no matter how hard they pushed, the reality was clear. They had nothing left. Meanwhile, my life slowly returned to normal, but it was different now. I wasn't just the person who had been wronged. I was the one who had turned everything around. The house became a symbol of my victory, a victory that was not just about revenge, but about regaining control over my own life. Every time I walked through those front doors, I couldn't help but smile, knowing that I had done what no one thought I could do. As for my half-sibling, they became a shadow of the person they used to be. Their attempts to gain sympathy from others were met with indifference. The support they had once enjoyed from family and friends slowly dwindled. Eventually, they disappeared from the scene altogether. No longer a part of my life, no longer a threat to my future. I didn't feel bad for them. They had made their choices, and they had been wrong. They had underestimated me, thinking I was weak, thinking I would just roll over and accept their betrayal. But I had shown them just how strong I really was. I had taken control, not just of the house, but of my own destiny. The pain of betrayal had turned into something much stronger, power, and I wasn't going to let that go. In the end, I realized something important. Revenge isn't always about destroying your enemies. Sometimes it's about reclaiming what's yours, showing that you won't be pushed around and standing tall when everyone else expects you to fall. I had taken control of my father's house, but more importantly, I had taken control of my own life, and nothing could ever take that away from me.